Welcome to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast. In this podcast, we inspire advisors with ideas and pathways to break through barriers and build a thriving retirement income business. We will interview innovative technology developers, business leaders, and successful advisors, then help you organize and execute these ideas to move your business forward.
Hey folks, this is Jack Martin. I'm the virtual CMO for InsureMark. I want to thank you for joining us today on the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast. This is where leading advisors in our industry are coming by the droves on a daily basis to hear what the brightest people in the business are talking about in terms of helping us elevate our business, helping us break through to a higher level, help us level up. And today, I couldn't be more excited to have Tamiko Toland. We've been friends for quite a while. Those of us, that know her a little bit, refer to her as the Annuity Yoda. She has the answer. She was with Canex for a long time, and then was with TIAA. So she's been on, both sides of the street from a distribution as well as from a manufacturing perspective. And now she's got her own consulting business. Hey, Tamiko, welcome to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack. It's great to see you again.
So for those of us who are on the podcast who maybe don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background and what's going on in your world that you see that's important to us.
Sure. So I got my start as a trade reporter and actually started in more of the 401k mutual fund area, but shifted over very quickly to annuities because that's the most fun part of our business. I do genuinely love annuities. I find them fascinating. There's always more to learn, and that's my favorite. So I then worked at Strategic Insight, where I ran the Annuity Insight service. And so really market intelligence focused, that's been kind of my bread and butter, is learning about what's going on at a pretty high level. At Canex, I really cut my teeth on learning more about the quantitative components, like the nitty-gritty of how annuities work, and really capped it off with my time at TIA because, there's nothing like working inside a Fortune 100 insurance company to learn, how the sausage is made. So that was very exciting, and I learned a ton, but it was time for me to take my show on the road and get into consulting and, kind of start some businesses. So I've got a couple things that I'm working on. The big one is really a company called IncomePath that I started with Michael Finca. And, so this is something that we did because out of frustration, because we felt like nobody was doing a great job of showing how an annuity really helps a retirement income portfolio. So that's part of what I'm doing.
Cool. I definitely want to spend a little bit of time talking about IncomePath in a minute. But when we were getting ready for this, we were talking a little bit about this moment that we're all experiencing with all the dollars that are flowing from 401ks into rollovers and into IRAs. And obviously there's, DOL rules and all the rest. There's product innovation that's happening. There's just a lot happening in that space. So talk for a minute for our listeners about what you see is happening there, from your seat.
Yeah. So, it's really fascinating because, I was early in this passion for putting guaranteed income inside of retirement plans, because that's where the participants are. That's where people are saving money. So, that's where people need to have access to lifetime income. And I still believe that that's true. But behaviorally, we know that most people end up rolling their money over when they retire. And that's the point at which they're making a decision about how they're planning for retirement. And I think there are a lot of folks out there that see this tremendous wave. The Cerulli numbers show that IRA rollovers that is like the one category that consistently increases in their projections, both in the size overall, but also the market share, right? And so if we're going to really help people with a sustainable retirement, that is the place to sit and to be able to serve, it's everybody. It's not just people with lots of assets or little assets. It's really the whole gamut that the industry is preparing to serve family.
Yeah, and for sure, there are a lot of facets to the conversation that happens when you meet someone who's in that moment, and certainly income is one of them. So these are folks that have been drawing paychecks and now they're not. Right. And so, Social Security may be enough, probably not. And so then the whole conversation around, okay, so how do I turn this big pile of money into an income stream? And how much, should I take? And, how do I structure this? And it just seems like, the chips are kind of against the consumer in trying to figure that out. You know what I mean? It seems like they don't make a lot of great decisions. They tend to underspend, I think is what David discovered. They tend to underspend, and so they aren't quite as happy in their retirement. And so it just feels like they don't have a good roadmap. So what are you seeing? What are folks? Is that true? Do you agree with that? I mean, is there an approach? If I'm an advisor today who wants to be in the flow of those rollover dollars, and I want to engage in that kind of conversation, is that a fair place to start?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people are not equipped, and we're not actually equipping advisors very well. I think that's the other part of the story. It's, we kind of blame advisors for not serving the consumer. Oh, now you got to explain annuities better to people. And, then we tend to talk to them about mortality credits. And I think that is where the conversation needs to stop. If you are explaining to somebody how an annuity works in the details, then you're going to completely lose the consumer. So, when I was at Canex and we did research with the Alliance for Lifetime Income, Canex still does that research. We asked people about their thoughts about lifetime income, and people loved annuities, right? But when it comes to how do you figure out how much you want, they don't know how to answer that question. And it's interesting because we actually did some specific research on planning and asking financial professionals, what planning methods do you use for retirement income? And really, they mostly use like an asset-based withdrawal strategy, right? Or they use a floor income strategy. We had bucketing in there, but nobody really, very, very few people said that. And they typically do one thing. It wasn't like, oh, we've got a bunch of tools in our toolkit. It was like, we have one tool. I have a hard time believing that every single client has a set of needs. And the thing is, the more that I really examine how we show the annuity, the floor strategy is a very blunt tool. And it's fine for demonstrating the income guarantee component, but not how that should affect the rest of the portfolio. In particular, the fact that having that guarantee allows you to invest more aggressively with the rest of the assets to allow greater portfolio growth. And therefore, not only, this isn't just about creating more legacy. This is also about growing income while you're actually in retirement, which was the entire purpose of inventing a variable annuity in the first place. It was to deal with inflation, right?
100%. And you're absolutely right. The tool set is really limited, and I think you're right to take the path of saying we need to educate the advisors more, because the advisors, we're really good at the accumulation story. We can explain asset allocation and all those kinds of things, but when it comes to the income side, I don't know that the same mastery is there yet. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is this whole notion of one tool. Everything looks like a nail, so you use your hammer. That's super valid. So how do we deal with that? What are you seeing? What are the tools that are evolving? What's the training? What's the mindset? What should advisors be looking at if they're really going to take a more, I don't want to say balanced, but a more varied approach?
Sure. Well, ultimately, I think all client conversations come down to meeting the client need and the preference. And the traditional approach towards risk tolerance doesn't apply well in retirement. And we kind of know this already, but the question is like, what is that preference? Like, what is it that people really want to get? And what is that lifestyle choice? And so are you more conservative, not just meaning how the assets are invested, but how does that income come in, which would lean you towards more guaranteed income. But then how do you help people understand how much guaranteed income they want, given the constraints of what they currently have? What are their assets? What do they see as their spending needs? And then how much adjustment do they expect that they might make to their spending? Because one of the things we accept with any kind of volatility is, well, your assets can go up, your assets can go down. When you're not having to spend it right now, you can just wait. Time is your friend. In retirement, time is not your friend because you're still taking that money out. And so therefore, if you say, well, I'm accepting volatility, that feels very different in retirement than it does while you're accumulating because you're constantly chipping away at that portfolio. So helping people understand that. And so, that's the whole idea behind IncomePath, is really creating visualizations to communicate that in a way that resonates with people who don't have a finance degree, that aren't quants, that aren't creating their own spreadsheets, because people want that kind of confidence when they're making a decision. And especially now with this rollover environment, say, okay, now with DOL, there's like more friction and you've got to really substantiate that decision. This is, I think so much is coming together right now. The need for annuities is higher than it's ever been. And at the same time, the pressure on advisors to have a compliant sale and to be effective in communicating to clients and to extract from them, like, what do they really want? That is all congealing right now. And frankly, it's a very exciting time to be out there and saying, hey, I want to help attack this problem and, work hand in hand with the consumers and with the advisors to solve it.
So there's I agree with you that there's an education opportunity. So there's this whole cadre of Gen Xers who are, can see the retirement finish line, right? And so they're probably in a mode where they can be educated and do more planning. But, if I'm separating, from AT&T, in 3 months, my opportunity to learn and, become proficient and make good decisions is pretty narrow. So you're right. I mean, the job of the advisor is a lot more difficult. Are plan sponsors or other folks in that space doing anything to help with that transition? Or should the independent advisors, wealth managers, RIAs, et cetera, be looking at that saying that's a need we need to definitely fill? What do you think?
Yes, the answer is yes. Everybody wants to solve this problem. The reality is, if every single plan sponsor decided today, yes, we absolutely want to add lifetime income, and this is exactly what it's going to look like, it's not like it would be available for people tomorrow. Like, just the implementation time, the decision, like it's kind of a long life cycle for adding something to a plan. And that's assuming everybody already knew what they wanted to do. So what we're seeing on the implant side is really a gradual adoption. And it starts from the low-hanging fruit, which is adding SPIA at retirement so that people have access to some form of lifetime income. Doesn't matter, defaulted, not defaulted, how close to retirement are you? Because that net is the final net before you go off the edge of the cliff, right? And that's where you capture them and say, okay, well, this is an opportunity. Now, it's not the easiest thing to deliver that, like in terms of getting lots of people on board, but it's a start. And so that tends to be the first thing that a sponsor would consider. Again, how many folks is that going to help? Like, there's still so much opportunity with the rollover business, because that's going to continue, and for advisors to come in and say, hey, let me help you with your retirement income needs that it turns out your retirement plan didn't solve sufficiently.
So if we only had a tool where we could kind of focus on the most important issue, which is, my income and, how I'm going to be taken care of and how I can see that without all the distractions of all these technical things like SWIPs and SPIAs and bucketing and all the rest of that. If there was only a tool that could do that, what do you think?
If only. If only. Yeah. So, it's funny because when I first started talking to Michael about IncomePath, it wasn't necessarily crystal clear what we were going to end up with. But working together, we share a philosophy, and that is that we need to get people to understand the underlying concepts, and we need to get them directionally there. And we need to strip out everything that's not necessary for the decision of how much guaranteed income do I need. And so that's really what we have been laser focused on, is helping people answer that question. And when you really go down, like obviously there are lots of different things that you need to input, right? And there's lots of details that go in, particularly when you're like, you may have a carrier illustration of a particular annuity, all that stuff. That's fine. Enable all that. But it really comes down to how much annuity, and then how are you going to deal with the equity allocation to the rest of the portfolio. Now, there are certainly certain systems where they don't allow you to consider the annuity as part of the fixed income allocation. They're still going to look at the portfolio on its own, and they may have constraints on that. But really, you should be looking at what your fixed income is, the guaranteed income coming in is supporting that fixed income allocation. And so you're putting less strain on the rest of the portfolio. Right. And because you're not drawing all those, those checks out of your withdrawals. And therefore you can invest more aggressively and you can take advantage of that growth. You will be exposed to some variability and there is some downside. And so recognizing the scope of that in combination with having the guarantee, that is really, to me, the combination of pieces of information that people need in order to feel like they're confident in retirement and they can actually take those withdrawals, they can spend their money, and especially we all know that when people get a check in the mail, that is like getting the check for their employer. Even if it's their own money they're paying back themselves. That is the money that you were allowed to spend. Harold Evensky, who serves the richest people, he likes annuities because it gives his clients the permission to spend. Because otherwise, they let the Bentley get dusty sitting in the garage because the price of gas went up. I mean, it's kind of crazy. People have psychological responses to the economic environment and to their habituation.
Oh, that's so true. And, I think we learned a big lesson during the pandemic about that. I mean, people were able to constrain their spending in reaction to the perception that the economy, was going to hell in a handbasket. And so, if to your point, I mean, even at the highest income levels, I mean, folks were able to say, hey, maybe I don't need the extra trip to Saint-Tropez this year, and to manage accordingly. And I'm obviously joking. So if I'm an advisor, what's that conversation look like? I mean, there's a discovery portion to this. So what kind of inputs? I mean, am I programming the Monte Carlo simulation for this? Do I have to look at capital market assumptions? I mean, how granular does the advisor have to get to this visualization process?
I had a conversation with somebody today, and they're like, how long would it take to input for our clients? 60 seconds. For a basic illustration, 60 seconds. Because it's, like I say, it's very high level. But in addition to the actual imaging we also have a guide. So we do use a goal-based process. And it's up to an advisor whether they want to use that or not. But it basically walks through the important concepts. For the very first concept is, okay, what's all the money that you've got available at retirement? What are all your assets? And you can do one of two things. You can spend your money while you're alive, or you can give it away to people when you're dead, right? And so those are the only two options. And so put everything into two buckets. Now, there are other ways that people kind of chop this up. You know, you can add life insurance, blah, blah, blah. And for us, like we put emergency savings in that legacy bucket, right? So the idea being that you are identifying the pool of assets that is meant to be spent down. And, you know, we joke, my former colleague, Branislav Nikolic, he jokes about how, like, you know, you want to die, you know, with $1 in your pocket, right? He's not the only one to joke that. But nobody's actually going to do that. Nobody wants to die that way. Like that's terrible. How stressful is that? Right. But still, that's the concept. And so that's the first thing that we help frame. And then it's around spending flexibility. And this idea that rather than having a very fixed spending goal, because that's actually not what retirement looks like, that people respond naturally to what happens in their portfolios. So how much variability can you tolerate in terms of your spending goals? And so a lot of that for us is like helping people understand not just their budget and not just their essential needs, but also what are your aspirations? Because if you're successful, if you're lucky, not successful, this is not a success thing. If you're very lucky in retirement and your portfolio does really well, you can get more income. But what are you going to do with it? How important is that to you in your lifestyle? It may be very important. It may be not so important. So you may be more dialed down to, I want more guarantee because I'm very nervous and I'm worried about, like, I read a lot of history books, right? And so that's part of the modulation, standing like, no, I really, really don't want to have to drop my spending by 5% a year, right? But that's another thing that we frame around. And lastly, it's really about equities and the role that the guaranteed income has in stabilizing the portfolio, equities, and how they growth potentially, but they also introduce performance. And so those are the steps that we go through, and we have some like educational pieces and kind of interactive stuff that we're building.
So that just opened up a whole raft of questions. So can I input my client's portfolio? Can I say, you know, they own $1 million in Berkshire and, you know, $2 million in tips, and can I get that granular in
No,
this?
we don't. So what we want to know is what's the total? So we want to know, oh, you have $3 million, and then just what is the target asset allocation? So what is the equity piece?
Okay.
So what's the equity percentage?
Gotcha.
And then what is your target income? And target income is the income on the first year.
Right.
When I say, so what is your spending going to be?
Okay. So then how do I learn about whether, you know, I can constrain or how important the money is? Because most of the people I talk to don't have a really good grasp on that. So am I doing it within the experience? You know, as I turn the knobs, I'm seeing, you know, how those trade-offs cycle up and down. And so I can say that doesn't feel good, that feels better, kind of a thing. Is that what's happening?
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
It's dynamic.
Gotcha. Okay, so the learning for the client happens within the experience itself. It's not that we need to come in and say, you know, here's my attitude about spending, you know, here's how I feel like, you know, from a budget perspective, you know, how I would react. Okay, got it. So that's the first conversation I have with the client, you know, so they're 6 months away from, you know, that Johnny paycheck moment. And, you know, so we're saying, let's plan this, and we play with the dials and we say, I'm comfortable doing this. Here's my allocation to guaranteed income. Here's my allocation to equities. So then the ongoing conversations. So when I get into, you know, my quarterly or biannual or semi-annual or annual reviews, you know, whatever my frequency is. So what's that look like? Do we just redo the experience, or what's your thinking there?
Yeah. So it's a combination of that. And then we actually do also have sort of a withdrawal estimator. So based upon our algorithms, that gives you kind of a range based upon whatever your preference is in terms of variability. So you know, the portfolio has been updated because something happened or didn't happen, right? And you know what you're getting. It's not a lot of inputs. Again, it's like input wise, it's really minimal, but it will give you, based upon what you took in spending before, say, okay, well, we're saying the algorithm says you could spend a lot more, you spend a lot less, or you're just like right in the middle. And then here, this is what plus or minus 5% looks like. So if you want to limit the increase to 5%, then here it is. But actually, we're saying you could actually go higher than that, or vice versa. Hey, you didn't want to, constrain more than 5% on the downside, but actually your portfolio really tanked. So, if you can pull back more, then that's fine. But just as a way of visualizing and contextualizing what the impact of a spending change would be, because so often we give people like a single number, and somehow they're supposed to. This portfolio, you're going to take withdrawals, and you have an 85% chance of success, which, by the way, is like a perfectly fine number for a lot of, and I'm like, I sit there and I think that's 15% chance of failure. Is that 15% chance of cat food? Like prostitution? I don't know what is it. Is that going to be my like sideline job in retirement? Like, I really desperately hope not. But the reality is we know most people don't get to the point of running out of money because they make adjustments beforehand. That's why the flexibility piece is really important. And so it's a concept, but it also affects the math. But what we do is we try to hide the details of the math and focus on the concept itself. But it's all in there, because otherwise you'll force ruin of a portfolio if you just use like a Bengen model in cases where you're like, no, Bengen wouldn't do that. Bengen himself, he pulled back on his spending during the pandemic when his portfolio was down and when inflation was high, and he was like talking about, well, you can turn the heat down and you don't need to eat out much. And he's like, as long as I got food in the fridge. I'm like, he sounds really fun. But the point is that I would hope that he was successful enough, given the popularity of the 4% rule, to have the ability to spend more. He is now the poster child for why people would benefit from an annuity.
This has been a really interesting discussion. Maybe we can circle back after you launch and see what's new. But so here's help me give our listeners some takeaways. Okay, so thing one, if you're not already in surfing this tsunami of 401k rollovers, then that's a good thing to start doing. Okay. Thing two, don't get locked in on a methodology for producing income. Right? Think about income versus equity. Is that a fair way to look at it? And how that unlocks opportunity for our clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
Thing three is don't get lost in the insurance company brochure. So don't get lost in mortality credits, in all of that kind of minutia, because the average consumer isn't going to get that, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing that's funny is that most annuities, regardless how you're getting the guaranteed income out, end up paying at least the guarantee a flat income. So they all sort of look like a SPIA. No, that's not literally true. There are plenty that look a little bit different, and they may have potential for more. But I'm just saying sometimes we overcomplicate to your point, getting too caught up in the brochure. So just like sticking to the basics and saying this is what this thing does at its essence. That's actually very good. People like it. We don't need more and different products. We just need to use the products that we have more effectively to solve for what the client's needs actually are.
Yeah, the sizzle isn't in the income vehicle. The sizzle is in the income. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So did you say something about programming in the product illustration or something, or are you using a generic placeholder annuity situation in IncomePath?
So we do accommodate having so you don't have to enter the full illustration, but we know that a lot of people are going to walk in with an illustration in hand, and you just put that stuff in. It's like 3 entries. It's like so not a big deal, because the illustration starts at retirement, doesn't start before then. So whatever happens as you're accumulating, and those are important things that happen. Don't get me wrong. What we care about is the income piece. If you have a GLWB, we just want to know, like, at the point when you're imagining retirement, what is that going to look like? How is that going to contribute to the portfolio? And that's actually pretty easy to do.
So is this going to be something that's going to be distributed by carriers, or is it by you folks?
So initially we're launching this, as a subscription service, SaaS. We're going to be sassy, but we're having a lot of partner conversations to get this out there. And particularly, a lot of carriers are interested in saying, oh, hey, well, can you model our specific product? Like, absolutely. But for the version that's going to individual financial professionals, that is generic, but it works great with most things, frankly.
Okay. And the ETA on this?
I'm not at liberty to say, mainly because I haven't lit enough fires to get hard dates. But
2024?
Really, go ahead.
Can we say
100%. Yeah. If it
2024?
doesn't happen by 2024, their blood will be spilled.
But we just don't know if it's Q2, Q3, Q4 is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say I feel very confident that it will be pretty soon in my mind. Like we're working on it.
Q2-ish. How's that?
I like that.
Okay. All right.
I'm feeling good about Q2.
There's no one listening right now. It's just you and me talking. So.
Okay. No. Oh, okay.
You me and 1,000 of our closest friends. No worries.
Yeah. That's
okay. So. Well, this is awesome. This has been a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to you because you really are, at the tip of the spear in a lot of ways with respect to what's going on with annuities and guaranteed income. So it's been fantastic. Anything you want to tell our listeners before you sign off?
No, but you'll be heartened to know that if you heard the gentle pinging, that was my technology guy pinging me on Slack. So this is all good. I'm very excited about this year. I think that the industry has been desperate for a better way to show annuities, and we've kind of hammered away at the problem in a certain way, and we need to approach it from a different angle. And on the 401k front, like I have a separate market intelligence service I'm working on that's really more education focused because that is so early. So I'm to Jack's point, like about the tip of the spear, like I feel like I'm sitting at different phases of the evolution of our delivery of guaranteed income to retirees. And it's very exciting to be privileged to participate in it and hopefully move things along.
Yep, I agree 100%. Hey, folks. This has been Tamiko Toland, Annuity Yoda and IncomePath co-founder, joining us today on the Breakthrough Advisor podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. This is Jack Martin, virtual CMO for InsureMark, signing off. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Breakthrough Advisor podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InsureMark. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.